The Canon 28-105 f3.5 through 4.5 really shouldn't be a good lens. I mean, think about it. This Mark II version of the lens, having been released back in 2000, makes it seem too old to be good. With an impressively long zoom range packed into a really small lens, the 28-105 seems too convenient to be good. And considering you can now get one for about $80 to $90, it seems too cheap to be good. But here's the crazy thing. This is a good lens. In fact, I'd say it's the best standard zoom you could get for under $100. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a perfect lens. In fact, it actually has one major flaw. But even when you take the downsides into consideration, this is still a mind-blowingly good value. Now, let's talk about the build quality. And to put it simply, this lens is way better built than it has any right to be. This lens doesn't feel nearly as cheap or plasticky as anything else in the price range. Not only does the lens feel very sturdy and metallic, but you actually do get a metal lens mount, which is seriously impressive for a lens that's under $100. Now compare that to some other lenses that are under $100. Here I have a 50mm f1.8, and here is an 18-55. And let me just tell you, the 28-105 is just galaxies better than those. Now don't get me wrong, this is no L lens and no one would ever confuse it for one, but here's the thing. I would honestly say that the 28-105 has more in common with an entry-level L lens than it does one of these other sub-$100 lenses. Think about that for a second. Another impressively good feature of the lens is the focusing system. Now, of course, this lens has the USM autofocus motor, and honestly, I just love USM. I don't know why we ever asked for anything more. USM has always been perfect for me, and with this lens has incredibly fast, accurate, and silent autofocus. As we could see here, autofocus of this lens is exactly what you'd want. But with that too, this lens also has an incredible manual focus mode. It has the nice features of a dedicated distance scale, full-time manual focus, so you could turn the focus ring and adjust your focus even if it's set to autofocus like it is right now. And of course, it has a ludicrously better focus ring than other lenses that are under $100. Just think about how impressive it is that this lens, for less than $100, has such good build quality and such a good focusing system. I mean, think about it. To get a modern lens that's as good as this in those two regards, you'd be spending at least $500, which is one of the many reasons this is a really good prospect. One of the other things I really enjoy about this lens is the zoom range. I mean, here's how I see it. If 28-105 isn't the perfect zoom range for a standard zoom lens, then I don't know what is. I just think of all the classic fields of view this lens can give you. 28mm, 35, 40, 50, 65, 85, 100. I mean, if you think about it, if this were to have any more focal lengths on either the wide-angle end or the telephoto end, you'd start creeping into super zoom territory. But with this lens, by not giving you those additional extreme focal lengths, it saves you from having to deal with the many downsides of using a super zoom, which, as you probably know, super zooms generally have much worse build quality. They typically have very low-end focusing systems and so on. Now, I think basically everyone will agree that the 28-105 is a great focal range on full frame, but it's also great on APS-C. You're still getting a very useful set of focal lengths if you attach this to an APS-C camera. It starts off at a nice general-purpose standard angle and zooms into something that's actually decently telephoto. So because of that, back when I only had an APS-C DSLR, I've brought this lens with me on trips and had it been my only lens, and I was completely satisfied. Even on APS-C, it's still incredibly versatile. Another thing that's definitely worth mentioning is the maximum aperture. Now sure, this lens does not have a constant maximum aperture, but here's the thing. This is still a sub-$100 lens. This is still like a $90 lens. And virtually any other lens, even slightly as affordable as this, will have a maximum aperture that goes down to f5.6 or 6.3 or something like that. So the fact that the maximum aperture of this only narrows down to f4.5 is really impressive. I mean, think about it. The 18-55 kit lens is a lens that's objectively worse than the 28-105 in virtually every single way. The maximum aperture goes down to f5.6. Which really shows how impressive the 28-105 is, especially when you consider that it's essentially the same price as an 18-55. So how about the image quality of this lens? Now on full frame, it's actually very good. Sure, there is some softness all the way open at f3.5, but once you stop down to f4.5, images become very usable, and at f5 all the way down past f11, the images you get from this lens on full frame actually are very sharp. So on a full frame camera, this lens is actually a very good performer. Now here's the thing though. How does this lens perform on APS-C? And remember how I said this lens does have a major flaw? Well, here's the thing. From f3.5 all the way down to f5, the images are incredibly poor on APS-C. I mean, this is one of the few lenses that when it's at those apertures, the images are so blurry and smudgy and soft that you don't even need to crop in whatsoever to see how poor the image quality is. Now here's the thing though, this lens is redeemed. From f5.6 to f8, the images become very respectable, and from f8 down to f11, this lens is actually noticeably sharper than Canon's 24mm pancake lens, which is really impressive because you have to remember, the 24mm is not only way more recent than this, but it's an f2.8 prime lens that's specifically designed to be used with APS-C cameras. So the fact that this lens is way sharper at the narrow aperture is actually very impressive. But here's the thing, even when the image quality is soft on APS-C at those wider apertures, the images this lens gives you just have this sort of rustic, timeless quality. The images just have this sort of undescribable charm to them. So even if you're at one of the apertures that gives you good image quality objectively or bad, at the very least you'll be getting visually interesting images, if not subjectively appealing. Which when you take that into account, plus the fact that it gets sharp at the narrower apertures, I think that does redeem the soft image quality wide open, at least to some extent. So if anyone still doesn't believe that this is a very good lens on APS-C, as well as full frame, let me let you in on a little secret. Every single sample picture I showed you, I took with my APS-C camera, not my full frame. Think about that for a second. So is the Canon 28-105 f3.5 through 4.5 Mark II the best standard zoom lens? No. Is it the best lens under $100? No. But is it the best standard zoom under $100? Without a doubt. I mean, just think about it for a second. Truly solid build quality, a great focusing system, an incredibly useful zoom range, an unexpectedly wide maximum aperture, and mostly great image quality. It really is hard to believe that this lens is as cheap as an 18-55 kit lens.